She walked up the aisle to be the Duke's wife, but she couldn't take her eyes off his brother-in-law. The bells rolled through Seville like bronze surf, a slow, sonorous tide that shook the dust in the rafters and pressed on the ribs. High noon poured through the stained glass in bright ladders. Incense drifted in soft blue threads that caught the sunshine and made it visible. The nave breathed, pews shifting, silks whispering, fans opening and closing with a language of their own. Isabelle walked the aisle as if each step were a duty sewn into her bones. The lace mantilla trembled with her breath. She tasted orange blossom and candle smoke. Her shoes made no sound on the worn flagstones. She felt the stone anyway, chilled and steady under the soles, telling her that thousands had walked this way before. Hands folded, chin lifted, she let the ritual carry her, but it could not carry the beating of her heart. The Duke of Castellar waited by the high altar, cut from privilege and habit, erect, contained, a man who knew how to turn a crowd into an instrument. His profile caught a blaze of colored light and turned it into something colder. He did not move. He did not need to. That stillness told the whole city that he had nothing to fear. Isabelle's gaze knew where it ought to rest. She kept it there until her resolve thinned and heat flared high in her chest. And then, drawn as surely as tied to the moon, her eyes slid to the pew at the front left. A man sat there not by rank in the first row, but by proximity to the family. He was motionless like the Duke, but charged differently, as if he held very still to keep something dangerous from spilling into the open. Sebastian de Valderia. He did not look away in time. For a heartbeat too long, their eyes caught and held. The nave receded. Candles hissed in their high iron cages. The press of sight was a touch. Her breath fogged her veil. She looked down at her hands as if she'd forgotten how to clasp them. Somewhere on the left, a fan snapped shut with the precise click of a reprimand. Lace rustled. The air cooled against her damp palms. She kept walking, the measured steps, the measured distance. The Latin responses began, familiar words floating like carved boats on the incense. Dominus vobiscum, et cum spiritu tuo. The canon's voice somewhere close, the officiant at the rail, the choir boy lifting a book. The cathedral was an engine, and she was a small part in motion. Heat gathered under the mantilla at her temples. She thought of nothing. She thought of the grove, of wind in the silver leaves, of a hand that had smelt of leather and rain, of a kiss so light it had shocked her with how it could burn and not bruise. She thought of that, and then forced it away. A sin to think of it here. She fixed her mind on the altar, on the tall white candles guttering slightly in the draught. Someone had bound her veil perfectly that morning. She wouldn't have minded if it had bitten a little, but the pin at her temple pressed differently, a weight that felt like a secret tucked into her hair. As she took the next step, it shifted. She felt the small drag. Another step and it loosened. Another, and the little carved pineta, orange petals and leaves cut from pale horn, slipped free. It fell with the sound of a fingernail on glass. It bounced once, twice, and skittered along the aisle edge, spinning in a little circle near the front pew. A gloved hand moved before anybody else. The hand stopped the pin. The glove's leather was soft, the color a sober brown, the gesture effortless. Sebastian's fingers came down, not a grab, merely a stilling of a wayward thing. He did not look at her then. He looked at the pin, and perhaps he heard the sound she made inside when the little object, so innocent to anyone else, became the loudest thing in Spain. She made herself keep moving. No falter, no reach. No outward sign that the piece that had sat against her pulse had just leapt into the open. She made herself a vessel and moved toward the altar steps. Sebastian lifted his eyes, not to her, to the child acolyte nearest him, who had seen the small accident and stood unsure. He passed the pin to the boy with no flourish, with a care that made the transfer look like respect, not custody. "Return it," he said softly. The boy looked at the hairpin shining in the shape of orange flowers. He looked at the bride. He looked at the man by the altar. He looked at the canon walking near the rail to confer with the officiant. His hands made a cradle. "Yes, Signor," he whispered, because the word fit the glove, even if it didn't fit the church. Sebastian turned his head then, and his mouth shaped a word toward her through the veil. No sound, only lips. "Forgive me." It struck like a bell inside her. She did not blink. Her eyelids might have been made of glass. The acolyte stepped into the aisle, small shoes quiet as a cat's paws, and carried the hairpin toward the front. The knave noticed all of it without seeming to look. Fans slowed, shoulders tipped. The current of attention leaned and then drifted back, because nobody wanted to be caught staring at the very thing they watched. On the right, near the transept, a lady of perfect rank raised her fan, not to cool her face, which was composed, but to send a small flutter that meant caution to those who spoke in that code. The Dowager Duchess of the house noticed the acolyte, noticed the glint, noticed the shape of the carved petals. Her fan stopped moving. The pause meant more than a paragraph spoken in any drawing room. Isabelle felt the air thin. She could smell the wax now with its animal sweetness. She climbed the first altar step. The boy, very small in the big space, reached the missal stand at the rail and set the hairpin there, careful, as if it were a relic left by a saint on a day when saints came down to see how mortals behaved. The officiant turned a page, the vellum making a sound like a sigh. Isabelle lifted her chin and watched the white margin flutter and settle. She thought, "Breathe." She thought, "One more step." Behind the rail, the canon's voice continued, precise and measured, guiding the rite in a path that had never bent for one woman's heart. Then it slowed. Not stopped, but slowed, as if he too heard something under the words. His gaze flicked, quick and sharp, to the right. He saw the hairpin. He saw the acolyte's uncertain mouth. He saw the way the Dowager Duchess held her fan like a scepter. A murmur ran down the women's pews, no louder than silk shivering. A question in it. Why would a peasant bride wear orange blossoms carving rich enough to catch the eye of the dowager? Another question under that, softer. Whose gift? The dowager made a small sign to the nearest server. It was not a dramatic thing. It looked like a mother smoothing the hem of a child's coat. But somebody always watched her hands, and when she moved them, the city moved. The server did not need more than a tilt of the chin. He approached the rail and nodded to the boy. He did not ask whose it was. He did not ask permission. He reached for the small object and lifted it free of the missal stand. "For the Virgin," the dowager said across the little space, her voice low but carried by the vault. "An offering, on a day that asks for humility." Her words lay on the air like silk and fell just where she wanted them. An offering. Humility. How many ways could a single sentence cut? The acolyte flushed. He looked at Isabelle, as if a child's sense of law required the owner's approval. Isabelle's mouth felt stiff. She shaped the only answer that wouldn't make another storm. "As you wish," she said, and the words came light and obedient, and they tasted like ash. The server bowed slightly as if she had done him a kindness, and carried the hairpin toward the right transept where the statue of the Virgin waited under a canopy of flowers and candles. The dowager's attention tracked the movement. The pin that had once touched Isabelle's skin disappeared into a cluster of lilies and diamonds and offerings left by those who had something to prove. The officiant cleared his throat gently and drew the attention back where it belonged by the book. He looked at the bride, at the groom, at the sum of everything gathered. He nodded once to Canon Esteban. The canon inclined his head, a small agreement in the great machine, and returned his eyes to the text that led to consent. The Duke's gaze had not moved easily all this while. Now it moved. He looked left. It was not a turn of the head that would trouble portraits later. It was a flick, a calculation. It touched Sebastian and returned to the rail, leaving a line burned in the air behind it. Sebastian did not lower his eyes in time. He had been watching the acolyte, his jaw working once, a muscle that betrayed him when nothing else did. He met the Duke's look. Something unspoken crossed the space like a line drawn under an account to make the figures stand still. He turned his face forward with a smoothness he had learned years ago in rooms where a glance could be the difference between safety and fire. Isabelle felt all of it like the weight of a hand on her back pushing her the final steps. She took them because the ritual demanded it, because her family depended on it, because duty, once invoked, was heavier than air and lighter than blood and filled the lungs whether one wanted to breathe it or not. The choir hummed a chord that caught at the top of the space and hung there. People settled, sensing the moment when the words that mattered would be asked and answered. The officiant's fingers rested on the page. The canon's hand lifted slightly as if to address some small point of phrasing with the precision that made ceremonies run like clocks. Isabelle reached the place at the rail where brides stood. She felt the cool stone through her shoes. She kept her chin high. She did not cry. In the luminous corner of her eye she saw the flowers and the offerings and the small pale shape tucked among them that had once been hers twice over, by touch and by promise. The pin had not been stolen. It had been taken with perfect manners. Her breath came shallow and fast, and she disciplined it, pulling each inhale in and sending each exhale out as if she were folding linen. The officiant began the words that would ask the vow. He spoke without haste and without haste wasted, his voice clear, the Latin firm. The canon heard the shift of a heel. He looked to the right again. He did not miss a movement at the periphery, never had, not in a lifetime of being the mind that kept the city's holiness intact. The dowager's fan moved now, slow and steady, like a pendulum. The ladies watched that fan more closely than the words of the rite. Sebastian sat very still, hands on his knees, shoulders straight, a man who was willing to be sculpted into propriety if it would save a life. His mouth had stopped saying anything. He had apparently run out of silent words. The Duke's attention returned to the book with the efficiency of a mind that placed duty ahead of nuisance. Whatever calculation he had been doing, he had finished it for now. The nave grew quieter, an animal holding its breath. A man coughed once, quickly ashamed. Somebody dropped a rosary bead and bent to catch it, the click of wood on stone sharp in the hush. Light shifted on gilded saints and made their painted eyes look alive for a blink. Isabelle tasted tears and swallowed them, and felt the lace brush her cheek each time her breath touched it from inside. She heard her own name in the litany of the Latin, not in words, but as something meant and binding. The officiant turned the page. The vellum flashed and fell, revealing the lines that asked for consent. The rhythm of the rite swelled toward that precise crest. Canon Esteban lifted his hand, palm outward. He did so not as a man carried away by gossip, nor as a zealot, but as a custodian who knew when a hinge had not been properly set. He did it with the steadiness of someone who would rather die than let the form of a thing be wrong when the heart of the thing was at stake. He did it knowing exactly how many eyes would turn and what it would cost to collect them back. Un momento, he said. The word ran through the nave and left a wake. The officiant paused with one finger still touching the margin. A long second hung across the rail, like a spun strand of glass that would either hold or snap. The dowager's fan stopped. Sebastian's hands closed once on his knees, a grip of bone on bone. He looked at Isabelle, and that look asked a question that had no answer permitted in public. The Duke did not frown. He did not smile. He watched the canon's hand as if it were a small flag raised on a far hill, a signal that had to be read correctly, or not at all. Isabelle did not breathe. Her throat closed and opened without air. She looked at the upraised palm and felt the floor shift, not in movement, but in meaning. The bells did not ring again. The only sound was the soft hiss of a candle finding a draught. Canon Esteban's hand cut the air between altar and couple. Canon Esteban did not lower his hand. He waited until the murmur fell back into the stone, and only the breath of the nave moved. Then he inclined his head toward the officiant and the Duke in a gesture of courtesy that asked permission while assuming it. "Let us step into the sacristy," he said. Isabelle heard the words the way one hears a door closing behind, firm and certain. The aisle shifted around her as attendants moved, not in panic, but in that quick, quiet pattern great churches know when ritual needs air. A verger in a dark cassock opened the side gate. The congregation did not disperse. They watched with the patience of people who understood that the most interesting things happen just out of sight. The little procession crossed from the blaze of the nave into the cool of the sacristy. It felt like stepping into shade at noon in the grove. Temperature altered, light changed, the same world but differently arranged. The room was all stone and wood, the walls hung with vestments that turned sunlight into fields of color. A walnut table waited with a registry bound in leather and a silver penknife beside a sand shaker. A thin taper burned on a bracket, its wax making a small pool on the tile, as precise as a clock. Isabelle stood between the table and a tall cupboard where embroidered dalmatics slept on wooden forms. She watched Canon Esteban take his place like a man setting a scale on a counter and laying out weights. The officiant came to his left with the book. The Duke stood across from her, composed, his hands folded behind his back. The Dowager Duchess glided to the other side of the table, her fan closed now, its lacquered edge catching light. A verger slipped in with the little carved hairpin cupped in his palm. "We took it from the Virgin's altar," he said to the canon in a tone of apology to the room, as if punctilious hands had done a small discourtesy to holiness for a larger good. Canon Esteban nodded once. "Place it here." The verger set the orange blossom pineta on the walnut. Its pale horn looked delicate against the dark wood, petals and leaves frozen in the shape of remembered spring. Isabelle felt the sight of it like a pulse. Esteban folded his hands and began, not with accusations, but with order. "Names," he said to the clerk. "Bans posted, impediments examined, witnesses recorded." He listened as the officiant and clerk recited details already known. His gaze flicked once to Isabelle. Not hard, not kind, only exact. "And this ornament," he said at last, touching the air above the little comb. "Is it part of the dowry, a house's gift, a relative's token?" It appeared at a delicate point in the right. Isabelle opened her mouth to answer and felt the test inside the question. The truth sat behind her teeth like a handful of fire. She chose the part that would not burn the building down. "It was given to me," she said, "on the morning." By whom stayed unspoken. The way she stood spoke enough. The dowager turned her head a fraction. The movement suggested a smile without making one. "Then the most fitting use for it has been chosen," she said to the room at large, her voice a touch of velvet. "Let it go to the Virgin, as an offering of humility from a bride who begins as she means to go on. We are many in this city, and humility becomes us in our joys." The clerk wrote that down. The verger looked grateful to have a course. He extended a hand to lift the pineta. The dowager's fan rested against the table, still closed. Isabelle watched the fan and thought it looked like a blade in a sheath. Sebastian stood near the door. Isabelle felt him at the edge of her sight the way one feels a window open behind. He had followed as family, not as spectacle, and now he kept his eyes on the table, not on her. He looked like a man who had been taught the exact weight of silence and the moments when one must spend it. Canon Esteban spoke again, his voice quiet and dry. "There is no named impediment," he said. "However, I must note that the sudden appearance of a personal ornament not listed among the bride's things is irregular." He turned to the Duke without flinching. "I will enter a remark in the book. If your grace desires the right to continue today, we must proceed with care and with an understanding that an inquiry may follow." "Of course," the Duke said. No ruffle of anger disturbed the surface of his tone. His gaze took a clean path from the canon's face to the registry and back. "We value the Church's care for forms." The dowager addressed the verger softly. Set the offering aside. I will see that it is placed with due propriety." The pinata left the walnut's dark shine and entered the dowager's keeping. She did not hide it. She lay it upon a folded handkerchief of white and tucked both into the small reticule hanging from her wrist. The movement was neat enough to be decent and clear enough to be recorded in a dozen eyes. Isabelle steadied herself against the thought that an object could pass from her hair to an altar to a reticule, and with each change of hand acquire a new meaning. Duty, offering, evidence, layers applied like varnish. From the corner of the sacristy came the faint scratch of a quill. The clerk blotted, shook sand. A tiny cloud fell and made a pale drift against the written line. Wax slipped down the taper and pooled more. The smell of beeswax and starch and a hint of incense clung to the air. The noises from the nave pressed at the stone door like a soft sea. A movement near the cupboard caught Isabelle's notice. The Duke's steward stood a pace behind Martine. He had found her brother without effort. Debtors learn to be visible to those who own their ledger. The steward's voice, pitched low, carried in threadbare lines through the space. "You will be glad to settle what you owe," he murmured, as if the sacristy were a counting house, "and to sign where I indicate, to spare your family distress." Martine nodded too fast. Sweat shone at his temple. He pressed his cap between his hands, as a man might knead bread that would not rise. Isabelle's mouth tasted of metal. Sebastian shifted, and for an instant, Isabelle thought he would speak. He did not. He looked instead at the clerk's pen, its nib gleaming, and then at Canon Esteban. He said, "The ornament is mine to answer for if an answer is needed." The canon's eyes came to him with interest, like a scholar hearing a word he did not expect in a familiar text. "Señor de Valderia?" "It belonged to the house," Sebastian said, "and if that was not perfectly true, it was close enough to honor and far from lie. I ask that it be lent for the ceremony as a courtesy to the day. If any censure attaches, it attaches to my judgment." A grain of sand slid from the registry's margin. The dowager's fan moved a finger width and went still. Canon Esteban inclined his head once. "I understand." He did not reach for the painita again. It remained where the dowager had placed it. "The book will reflect what is relevant to the rite. The rest can be spoken when the hour is less charged." He turned to the officiant. "We will proceed," with a note of irregularity. Isabelle exhaled. It was not relief. It was the sigh a rigging makes when a wind shifts and the sails take strain in a new way. A soft flurry of silk at the doorway drew attention for a heartbeat. Doña Amalia stood just outside the threshold where the sacristy opened toward the side aisle, her posture perfectly within the bounds of decorum and perfectly placed to catch every glancing remark. She had a talent for appearing as if summoned by necessity. She leaned toward a lady whose lace mantilla had slid a finger width and murmured, "Orange blossoms are for innocence, are they not? That carving, so refined. One could almost mistake a farm girl for a princess." Her companion lifted her fan. "Hush. I adore a vow that can stand beside a story," Amalia whispered. "We shall see which survives." The words slipped like fish back into the current of whispers moving along the aisle, and then she was only a polite shape again, framed by stone and light. Canon Esteban closed the registry for the moment with care and lifted his hand in a manner that this time signaled continuance rather than arrest. He nodded to the officiant. "We will return," he said. "The rite belongs in the nave." Isabelle let the cool of the sacristy soak into her blood once more before stepping. It calmed nothing. It slowed nothing. It only made the edges clearer. She followed the small procession back through the door, not needing to lift her skirt. The floor was spotless and ancient, and knew more secrets than any person alive. The heat of the nave met her like a hand. They came out to a congregation wound tight with appetite and dread. Fans thrummed. A man near the back had taken off his hat and crushed the brim flat in his hand. The sunlight, angled now, turned dust motes into gold seeds, floating in a harvest no one would gather. The officiant returned to the rail. Canon Esteban took his place, the book open to the marked page. The dowager stood where she had stood, the reticule a small weight at her wrist. The steward hovered near the side aisle, a paper folded in his fingers, his expression bland. Martine had found a pillar and leaned against it, as if the stone could soak panic from bone. Isabelle resumed her position. The moment reformed like a shell reassembling itself around a pearl it had nearly lost. She felt the place where the pennetta had been in her hair like a cool patch. Sebastian remained in the front pew. He sat as he had sat before, hands quiet, the glove on the bench beside him now, bare fingers curved lightly against the wood. He did not look at her. He did not need to. The part of her that had watched him from the first day knew the exact shape of him when he intended to intervene, and the exact shape when he intended to endure. Canon Esteban lifted his gaze to sweep the nave once, not to impress, but to warn the room that ceremony would go on, clean and uncluttered. He glanced at the dowager, at the steward, at the officiant, and then at the duke. He began to speak. The words returned to the track they had left, a carriage put back on rails. No one wanted to be the person who derailed it twice in one day. The questions would be asked. The answers would bind. Isabelle settled her breathing again in careful folds. Behind the altar, a choir boy adjusted a candle with a small iron snuffer and nearly burned his thumb. He hissed, a single sharp sound, and swallowed it because this space expects discipline from even the smallest. A stir traveled along the west end of the nave. People had begun to edge toward the doors in that thoughtless way crowds do when waiting grows uncomfortable and rumor promises relief outside. The vergers at the big doors shifted their staves closer to their bodies, a silent notice that the church was not a street and would not be treated like one. The Duke took all of it in without appearing to move. He had been trained to read a room the way a horseman reads a field. Slope, divot, shadow. He saw where panic would run first and where it would crater the ground. He saw also how swiftly a story could leave a threshold, gallop down a lane, and arrive dressed as truth in 100 mouths. His jaw had not changed shape, and yet the air near him seemed to cool a degree. He did not look at Isabelle. That would grant her a vulnerability in other eyes that she deserved in none. He did not look at Sebastian. That would light a fuse he had not chosen to strike. He looked at the vergers, those practical men who keep doors and collect alms and hear everything. He weighed the clock of the day, heat moving toward its slow decline, city bells expecting to call for vespers soon, the time left before 100 kitchens poured their contents into alleys and stories into the night. Canon Esteban had come to the first question. The silence asked for answers. A child whimpered and was hushed. 2 ladies whispered behind their fans and went quiet when the dowager's profile turned like a cardinal direction. The Duke stepped a fraction forward, just enough that the vergers could see him clearly. He did not raise his voice to fill the nave. He did not need to. His tones traveled the way water sometimes travels under stone, even inevitable, heard from within rather than without. "Seal the doors," he said. The iron shot into stone with a sound like thunder trapped indoors. The big leaves shuddered in their sockets. The nave flinched and then held as the bolt seeded. Rodrigo felt the room settle around his words. The weight of them did what he meant it to do. Order returned to the faces nearest the rail first, then spread down the aisles like a slow-moving tide. He did not look at the congregation. He looked at those who could move things. Vergers, stewards, the canon, his mother. He gave simple instructions. "Through the cloister," he told the verger at his elbow. "The principals only." The man bowed. He did not ask who counted as principal. He knew. He opened the low door to the side aisle. Air moved through the gap, cooler and carrying orange leaf and dust. Rodrigo faced the officiant and Canon Esteban. "We will not perform a sacrament for an audience expecting a quarrel," he said, courteous on the surface, iron underneath. "We will complete formalities under my roof." The canon inclined his head a fraction. It was agreement and caveat in one. "The church follows where conscience can walk," he said, and closed his book with 2 fingers as gentle as a benediction. Rodrigo signaled his steward with a look. The man ghosted toward Martin and drew him toward the side door. Good. Det moved when told. The dowager did not ask for explanation. She moved as if she had already known the next 3 steps. Her fan stayed shut. Her reticule bumped once against her wrist, the small weight inside no heavier than a walnut, and far more useful. Rodrigo did not spare a glance for Sebastian. He could feel him in the way a seasoned rider feels a second horse moving to his right. Useful, dangerous, loved once by his sister. Not the problem he would address first. He gestured to Isabelle. It was not gallant and not unkind. It was efficient. "This way," he said. The space between them meant other people would supply the thoughtfulness. He supplied direction. They moved. The side door swallowed them and gave them back to the cloister. The sound changed at once. The echo broke into pieces. Pigeons muttered somewhere in the eaves. Sunlight came slanted across the tiles and through the shadow of the arch like a clean stripe over the floor. Rodrigo's shoes struck stone with the steady measure of a man accustomed to being watched from windows. He counted the beats it would take to cross, the steps to the little gate that led into the palace yard, the turn into the waiting carriages. Calculation kept the mind useful. He spoke without looking back. "No one else," he told the verger. Keep them calm." "Yes, Your Grace." They reached the small gate. Outside, the air was brighter, hotter. A line of carriages waited under the chapel wall. Harness jingled. A driver straightened and touched the brim of his hat. Servants had laid a carpet between stone and step to keep silk from dust. Rodrigo did not need it. He took the first carriage. The dowager followed, hands folded, eyes on nothing and everything. He stood back a fraction so Isabelle could step up. He did not touch her. He did not offer a hand. A footman did. She took it. The veil brushed the carriage door with a sound like a moth's wing. Sebastian passed in front of him with the same careful absence of collision he had always maintained near Rodrigo. Their eyes met for the first time since the interruption. A bow could have been polite or provocative. Sebastian chose neither. He inclined his head by a breath, as he had always done when they pursued a single end by different roads. Rodrigo watched him climb into the second carriage. Good. Keep him where he could be seen. He gave the signal. The carriages rolled. The streets of Seville received them with their usual noise held back, as if the heat pressed the sounds downward. Timber gates half open, shopkeepers wiping their counters, a child chasing his shadow, a dog asleep in a doorway. The cathedral bell had stopped. The city waited the way men in line wait to see who comes back through a door and in what condition. Rodrigo's hand closed on the leather strap above the window as the carriage turned. He kept his voice low, the way one speaks near a horse's ear. "We host a reception," he said to the steward across from him. "Small, controlled. The court will have its crumbs. Immediately, Your Grace. And the doors? Shut as you ordered." The carriage swung through the palace gate. Rodrigo watched the walls pass like a book he had read too many times to be surprised by any of its sentences. He breathed once, slow. Under the breath was steel. He thought of the cost of calling soldiers to the border. He thought of the price of a scandal large enough to be discussed at dinner in Madrid. He thought of a single piece of horn carved like orange blossoms and the way it had complicated the figures in his head. He stepped down when the footman opened. The hall doors swung wide. Music came like watered wine, thin, civil, meant to cool. Rodrigo crossed the threshold and felt the palace take him the way the river takes the hull of a boat and steadies it. This was his water. He felt the current here. Isabelle followed the surge of light into the great hall and felt her eyes water from the change. Candles already burned in the chandeliers, the kindling done by quick hands at a word sent ahead. The light was too bright for the hour. It made everything look decided. She stopped at the foot of the marble stair, as a footman placed himself cleverly behind and to the left, a buffer between her and too much air. The coolness from the stone worked upward through the soles of her shoes. She needed it. A string quartet tucked under the far gallery tried to give the room the sound of normal life. The music was careful. The players watched each other's hands more than their notes. The dowager's footsteps did not hurry. She did not speak. She moved through the first arch and into a smaller room lined with books and maps, and a large escritoire polished enough to hold the reflection of a hand. Isabelle did not mean to follow her, and yet she found herself at the threshold, halted by the sight of a small thing placed into the center of a large table. The pineta lay on a square of folded linen. Its pale horn made a bright little island in all that wood. A sheet of fine laid paper stood waiting beside it. The dowager took a pen from a silver cup and shaped a single word in a hand that had ordered a dozen households and the fortunes of more: imprudence. She set the label by the hairpin, as if she were arranging a still life. The reflection of the word doubled itself in the sheen. Properly identified, she said softly, and the words could have meant many things, but none of them comfort. Isabelle did not speak. The room had the feeling of a net stretched and waiting. Any word would be a thrash that would only tighten it. A movement in her periphery drew her gaze away. The steward had found Martine. He guided him into the corner of the room behind a folding screen, painted with pastoral scenes that made work look like play and hunger like a mannerism. Isabelle saw the edge of Martine's shoulder, the cap in his twisting hands, the sheen of sweat at his hairline. "Sign here," the steward murmured. He spoke like a man coaxing a horse over a stream. "It is nothing more than your recollection that matters. This will settle what can be settled. You know how good the house has been." "I know," Martine said. His voice was a rope frayed at the pull. "If I sign, you show gratitude." Isabelle took a half step. The dowager's head turned a fraction, a pivot of an owl that sees movement. Isabelle stopped. She tasted the leather of the reticule in the dowager's wrist in her mouth, as if she had put the word itself between her teeth. A shadow touched the doorway. Doña Amalia had been a figure in threshold since they were girls. She smiled to Isabelle as if they had met at market by chance. "You look pale," she said. "You should sit." "I am quite well," Isabelle said, because her throat knew the shape of those words even when they cost. One always is, until one isn't. Amalia's gaze drifted to the escritoire. What a pretty trifle. So delicate. The city will sigh to think of such care lavished on a country bride. It improves us all. Isabelle did not move her eyes from the table. The Virgin's altar needs no improving. So pious, Amalia murmured. She let her fan touch her mouth. It cannot be easy to have so many eyes. They find what they want. Canon Esteban stepped into the study, the sacristy's cool still around his shoulders, as if he had brought a piece of the church with him and set it on the carpet. He looked at the hairpin, at the label, at the steward's back behind the screen. He said nothing for a long moment. Then, clearly, for the benefit of the room and the air, "I will open an inquiry if needed. The church prefers to be bored. Make the day dull for me, and I will be grateful. It is always my desire to spare the clergy excitement," the dowager said. "We will make no trouble for you." Esteban inclined his head. "I find trouble does not seek permission," he said. He turned to Isabelle and lowered his voice a degree. "You may sit if the heat strikes you. No one will think the worse of it." "I will stand," she said. It cost to hold the words still enough to carry. Music from the hall reached them, the same careful piece repeated because the quartet did not know whether to go on. Footmen passed like wind. The palace absorbed everything, turned panic to smoothness, made meetings into etiquette. A scratch of quill came from behind the screen. Sand hissed. Isabelle leaned without moving. She could not see the paper. She could see Martine's hand tremble. "Good," the steward said, the way a man says it to a dog that has sat at last. "Good." Doña Amalia drifted away with the slow interest of a woman strolling a garden, who has decided where the best fruit lies. Isabelle stepped backward, out of the doorway, into the brighter hall. The world continued at a slower speed outside the study. Courtiers stood in elegant knots that looked effortless and were the product of hours of practice. Their eyes slid over her and made notes she would never read. She turned toward the stair. Above, a child laughed. The sound was bright and quick and wrong in the room. She lifted her face. A little girl. She had seen her once in the Duke's party at a feast. A niece who had stacked sugared almonds into towers and demolished them with small shrieks, leaned between the balusters to look down at the quartet. Her lace sleeves were too long. Her slippers were a shade too big. Someone had tied their bows with a haste that spoke of a nurse dismissed to attend more urgent matters. "Señorita," a maid whispered, "do not." The child leaned farther to see the cellist's bow dance and slid. One heel skidded on polished stone. Her little hands flew up, fingers scrambling for purchase against smooth marble. A gasp ripped through the hall. The maid's hand shot forward and missed air. Sebastian had been standing at the edge of the room where the hall widened into a platform for the musicians. He had chosen the position because it allowed him to see everyone who wanted to see him. It allowed him to hold himself between a house's temper and a fool's provocation. He heard the child's laugh before he saw her. The sound pulled his chin up like a string. By the time the heel slid and the gasp went through the room, he had already moved. He crossed the space with the old economy of the field. No waste, no flourish. He set his foot, the leather sole taking the waxed floor clean, and lifted his arms without thought. The child dropped into them like a bird into reeds. The jolt traveled up his bones and sat in his shoulders. He turned at the waist, using the turn to bleed the fall, and set her down on her feet with the small indignity the truly frightened demand, which is to be held a moment longer than the world has time for. Her eyes were huge. She had not yet chosen whether to cry. He spoke first, because voice steadies. "Better to look from the safe parts," he said. "Music sounds sweeter when one listens from the ground." Her mouth trembled and then shut. She nodded, because children are braver than most adults and more practical. The maid arrived breathless, gratitude and terror making her hands clumsy. "Gracias, señor," she said. "Gracias." He let the thanks fall. It would be repeated enough for the story to survive. He stood straight and felt the eyes again. They were different now. They had widened over what would be told later as competence and courtesy. He would have preferred uselessness. It would have been simpler. Rodrigo's face, at the far end of the hall, did not change. But the air around him altered, a temperature shift that had nothing to do with the candles. Sebastian read it, and understood that every act carries two labels. One the world hangs, one a man must bear. Doña Amalia reappeared the way a hawk reappears over a field after a stoop. She held a paper folded twice between two fingers, just enough to show the color of the seal that had not yet been pressed hard enough to convince wax. She approached the dowager in the study doorway and held the sheet with the posture of a woman making a gift that cost her nothing and would cost someone else everything. "This came to my hand," she said, and her voice managed sympathy without surrendering relish. It seemed unwise to let it stray into chatter. The dowager took it. She did not need to unfold it to name it. She did so anyway, because sometimes one allows the room to watch. Her eyes moved over the lines. The script was Martin's, hurried, angled, his letters running into each other like men pushed through a narrow gate. Sebastian stood where he had stood after setting the child on her feet, and listened to the small sound a sanded paper makes when lifted. He looked at Canon Esteban. The canon's face was the stillness of a man who has heard confession until he can fill silences with it. He said, to no one, and to the hall, "The church will hear this properly, or not at all." Rodrigo left his place. He approached the study at a pace that served as a measure for the room. The court fell quiet beneath that step or pretended to continue talking in voices that made no meaning. The dowager raised her eyes. She did not hold the paper out to him as one offers a gift. She held it as one holds a blade. A statement, she said, signed by the bride's brother. It names imprudence. It names a man. Sebastian did not flinch. Names had a way of arriving in hands like hers. He looked at Isabelle instead. She stood near the base of the staircase, still as the statue of a saint no one has yet decided is useful. An ecclesiastical inquiry, Canon Esteban said, answering his own thought. If you force my hand, if the day insists. Later, Rodrigo said. He did not take the paper. He looked at the steward. Where did you get this? The steward kept his voice level. We helped a frightened man put truth in writing. Did you? Rodrigo's words had the smoothness of polished brass.
He did not preface the next sentence with title or name. He did not need to. Captain? The captain of the household guard stepped forward. He had been a statue near a pillar a moment ago. He became a man with legs and purpose. Your Grace. Bring Martin, Rodrigo said. He will remain in sight until we determine what else he wishes to sign. The captain nodded once to the two soldiers nearest the study.
Men trained to break drunken brawls and escort wagons of wine took 3 quiet steps and turned into the little corner behind the screen. Sebastian inhaled and let the breath out exactly to the end. He felt the part of him that knew how to argue rise. He stepped on its shadow. He would not add flame to a house already lit. He watched Rodrigo bend toward Doña Amalia a fraction. Keep your hands clean, Doña, the Duke said softly enough that only a few would hear, and all those had titles. You will need them. I always do, she said, unoffended. The city shakes mine all day. The soldiers re-emerged from behind the painted screen. Martin came between them. He looked like a man who had found out that a pen could be heavier than a chain. Isabelle could not feel her hands. She saw them. They hung by her sides as if they belonged to someone whose life she watched. She watched the soldiers take a position on either side of Martin. They did not bruise him. They did not need to. The grip on the sleeve said enough. It said where he would be next if he did not remember how to stand. Do not be afraid, she said. She did not know if the words reached him. She did not know if they were for him or to keep her own heart from breaking its way out. He looked at her. There was apology in it, and a routine kind of terror. He had been scared before. He knew how to do it. He did not know how to do this. The captain nodded to his men. We will go, he said, not loud, because dignity is a thing trained men offer instinctively to those who have little else. Wait, Isabelle said. She did not raise her voice. She did not plead. She took one step and then another. She moved the way a person moves when a river surprises its banks and promises to take what it can if one does not lay a hand on it. The dowager watched without moving. Rodrigo watched too, that same degree of stillness that makes men remember their posture. Canon Esteban drew breath as if he would say her name and then remembered it belonged to many people's mouths already today. Sebastian's fingers tightened once against his palm, as if grasping a hilt that was not there. Isabelle reached the nearer soldier. He smelled of clean wool and metal. His sleeve rasped her palm when she closed her hand on it. Unhand him, she said to the sleeve, to the man, to the world that had chosen the wrong person for its lesson. Her grip held because it had to, because it was the only thing in the room that belonged entirely to her. The soldier's head turned toward her, slow, surprised, respectful, already calculating to which command he must answer first. Isabelle did not let go. She would not be careful. She would not be obedient. Not in this. The hall leaned toward the 3 of them, the Duke, the Dowager, the Canon, the court, the quartet holding their bows in mid-air, as if the entire palace were a body drawn to a wound. Isabelle's fingers closed around the soldier's sleeve. Her fingers did not feel like fingers. They felt like rope knotted around a post in a storm. The soldier's sleeve was coarse under her palm. Isabelle held on. Senora, the captain said, careful, his tone the one men use with candles and powder. "Let us pass." She did not look at him. She looked at Martine. He had the color of something left too long in boiling water, leached and slack. "You will not take him away in this room," she said. Not as if he had stolen silver. The soldier she gripped worked his jaw once, not in impatience, but in the old habit of men who must follow 3 orders at once. He glanced to the captain. The captain looked past Isabelle to the Duke. Rodrigo did not raise his voice. He did not make a show of mercy. "Not here," he said. "Outside, the courtyard." A breath went through the hall, relief and disappointment braided together. The quartet loosened their hands. A courtier laughed too brightly and stopped when no one answered. The captain nodded. "This way." He gestured with 2 fingers, the smallest command that could move men and pride at once. Isabelle kept her hand on the wool until the first step had turned into the second. Then she let go, because if she did not, they would drag her too, and she needed to stand on her own feet. She walked beside Martine, close enough that his sleeve brushed her skirt, close enough that if a hand reached for him again, it would have to touch her first. They crossed the hall. The air shifted from tallow and polish to orange leaf and water the moment they passed under the arch to the courtyard. Lamps already burned under the arcades. Servants had moved quickly. They always did. The fountain in the center gave the night a voice softer than the hall's hum. The smell of citrus was clean and a little bitter, a scent that told truths. They stopped in the pool of light that fell from a chandelier hung on chains overhead. The captain placed his men at the edges. He did not make a ring. He made a square that could open or close. The dowager came with the rest, her shadow long on stone. She stepped to the low rim of the fountain and placed the little carved hairpin on its warm marble, resting it on a folded white handkerchief as if she were setting a chalice down for mass. The label from the escritoire did not follow. It did not need to. The gesture wrote what the paper had said. Canon Esteban was there, a quiet column under the arcade, already speaking to a footman who had run faster than most to carry a message. The canon's expression held the weariness of a man who could catalog every point of law and still know that people, not paper, make and unmake the day. Isabelle stood straight and didn't touch the fountain. The water's rim was so close she could see the hairpin doubled in its surface. She wanted to snatch it, to hide it in her fist until it dug into her palm and left marks she could map later like a pilgrim tracing scars. She did not move. The courtyard held too many eyes. Rodrigo took his place opposite her, light on his shoulders, darkness at his back. He could stand anywhere and look like the center of a room. The steward slid in near him with a notebook no thicker than a hand, but heavy with comfort for men who need numbers to make sense. Doña Amalia drifted to the far side, the better to see expressions and report them later with accuracy disguised as artistry. Martine swallowed and tried to stand as if sweat did not run down the side of his neck. He put his cap under his arm, then forgot it and started to twist it, remembered, and held still. The fountain spoke while people arranged themselves into positions that made meaning. A man cleared his throat. A night bird somewhere in the garden let out a thin note, more question than song. Canon Esteban stepped forward until the light struck his face and made him plain to every witness. "The church requires the truth be set in order," he said. "We are at the edge of a sacrament. If we proceed, it must be with conscience cleaned." He looked at Isabelle when he said it. It felt like a hand laid on a fevered forehead, cool and honest. The dowager unfolded her fan and did not move it. "We will spare you excitement," she said, the calm of her tone a warning. "Our house prefers gardening to drama." A second messenger pelted through the arch and skidded to a halt, breath lifting his shoulders. "His Excellency," he said to Esteban. "He is on his way." The bishop. Men did not cross town this quickly for trifles. The word traveled like a small wind. Bishop. The court adjusted. The soldiers took up new angles with their bodies that made corridors but no traps.
Isabelle's pulse dropped from her throat into her wrists. She felt it like a hand pressing from inside. She remembered the olive grove, the cool under the leaves, the smell of wet earth. She remembered a mouth that had promised nothing and given everything. That memory was not a weapon. It was a truth, and she stood in it. She drew breath. "I will say this," she said to the air, the arcades, the fountain, to the men who would make records and the women who would make stories. "I did not come free." No one moved. The words were simple. They unknotted something and tied something else. Rodrigo's gaze tightened. "Careful," he said. It was not a threat. It was a rope extended to a person on a ledge. "I am careful," she said, "and I will not lie at an altar." Canon Esteban's face did not change. Inside, Isabelle saw one muscle ease. She did not know if it was because she had told a part of the truth, or because she had told it well. Sebastian crossed the threshold then, the hall's brightness still on his shoulders. He stepped into the lamp's reach and stopped where it made sense, a pace and a half from Rodrigo, half a pace behind Isabelle's right shoulder, close enough to be counted, far enough to be denied. His gaze passed once over Martine, measured the distance to the soldiers, and returned to Isabelle. The line of his jaw said he had made a decision he could carry. The bishop entered the courtyard with 2 vergers and no pageantry. He looked like a man pulled from his desk and delivered into a fire that might take his house if he did not choose where to lay the water. He took in the fountain, the dowager, the captain, Isabelle's white, Rodrigo's stillness, and the small bone-colored comb on the stone like a sickle moon. "We will speak plainly," he said. "We will do nothing twice." He did not claim the center. He walked to it and let everyone follow the habit of honoring him until the circle formed. He looked at Canon Esteban. "Report." Esteban did, with no adjectives. He named the interruption, the pinata, the sacristy, the label not in ink but in intent, the forced cheer of a reception, the document a steward had harvested, the moment at the balustrade and the rescue. He did not speculate. He set bricks. The bishop nodded once after each. He turned to Rodrigo. "Your Grace?" Rodrigo's voice remained even. "We will not be baited," he said. "We will not perform a rite under a roof, jostled by rumor. You have our assistance in clearing the air." The bishop listened, as if listening were a craft that made strong vessels. Silence settled. It waited for something worth holding. Sebastian stepped into it. He did not look at Rodrigo first. He looked at the bishop, the way a man speaks to a judge to set all other listeners in their place. "Excellency," he said, "I will save time and honor if I can. There was a meeting weeks ago in an olive grove at the edge of the house's land. Rain. We took shelter. We spoke more than was prudent for our stations. I asked nothing. I offered nothing I had a right to offer. I kissed her once. I should not have done so. The fault is mine entirely." No one breathed loudly. The water in the fountain made patience of its fall. "You speak to shield her," the dowager said, soft. "It is gallant and late." "There is no shield," he said. "Only a line that can be drawn. Draw it through me and leave her clear of it. If your inquiry needs weight, I will carry it. If it needs payment, I will make it." Rodrigo's head turned a degree. The angle could have broken a man in uniform. "Payment." Sebastian met that look and did not lower his eyes. "The levy due from my title," he said. "This quarter and the next. Use it where your house must. Take it as if I had put my seal to it in ink. All you need is my word. You can have my seal by morning." Doña Amalia's fan opened. It made no sound, but every woman heard it anyway. The gesture meant admiration to some, prophecy to others. Isabelle closed her hand very slowly until her nails marked her palm. He had not looked at her as he offered it. He had kept his gaze on the man who could accept it. The bishop's profile showed nothing. Canon Esteban's eyes went to the soldiers and came back.
as if to remind himself what mercy can cost when it is not planned. Rodrigo did not answer at once. He walked the length of the fountain to the opposite side and back, not as a man who cannot decide, but as a man who reads the scale of a room by walking it. The hairpin caught his eye as he passed it. He did not touch it, his mouth flattened by the smallest degree. "The levy is owed to the crown," he said, "not to me. The crown will be happy to see it arrive clean," Sebastian said. "My offer says only that you will not be made to look poor at court while a rumor walks in front of you." The edge of the dowager's fan ticked once against her glove. "We do not purchase absolution," she said. "No," Sebastian said. "We purchase time and decency." Martine's breath made a small sound. Isabelle slid a fraction so her skirt's hem touched his boot. He looked down as if surprised to find he still had feet. The bishop raised his hand. He waited until even the fountain felt quieter. "The sacrament has not been conferred," he said. "The form was interrupted before consent. The church requires that consent be free. If a bride was not free to give it, there is a remedy. But it requires a public word, spoken in the place where the rite stood ready to bind." "From whom?" the dowager said, although she knew the answer. She asked because questions can sometimes reframe answers. "From the man who asked for that consent," the bishop said. He looked at Rodrigo. "The declaration must be yours, not as excuse, not as accusation, but as truth. You will be seen to suffer a cost for it. You must accept that." Canon Esteban exhaled through his nose, the breath of a man who had waited many nights for someone else to say what needed to be said. "If this is to be done, better that it be done now," he murmured. "Before the city decides it has already heard the story." The steward shifted his weight. He did not like mathematics he could not write. The captain watched Rodrigo, not because he doubted the Duke's courage, but because the next command would change how his men stood in their skin. Isabelle looked at the bishop's hands. They bore ink stains along the side of the index finger, near the nail. A man who wrote more than he blessed. A man who would put words in his book that would turn into other people's lives. She felt the moment move. It had a shape like a door that creaked before opening. Rodrigo stopped moving. He faced Sebastian for the first time since the confessions began, and measured him like a brother and not like a rival. "You will not fight me," he said. He did not make it a question. "No," Sebastian said. "I will not cross blades with my house. I do not know how to hate you without lying to my dead." Something passed between them then. A thing too old and too bald to be disguised. The courtyard held it with the discretion of stone. Rodrigo looked at Isabelle. He did not search her face. He acknowledged its existence in his house. The admission was not nothing. "You say you were not free," he said. "I was not," she answered. The words came clean. She tasted nothing bitter in them. He turned to Martine. "Did you sign a paper?" he said. "Because someone frightened you into thinking it would save your mother's roof." Martine swallowed. There was no strength left to lie well. "Yes." "Then we will not use that paper to make ourselves look tidy," Rodrigo said. The dowager's fan did not stir. Her stillness was the kind that makes people whisper. The bishop watched Rodrigo the way men watch horses who may clear a fence no one else will try. "You will be seen," he said. "I am always seen," Rodrigo said. A ghost of a smile touched his mouth and then went cold. "Better to choose the hour." He looked at the captain. "Keep the men where they can be counted. No hands on him unless he runs." The captain nodded. He took a pace back and stood as if he had never moved. Rodrigo walked to the fountain. He stopped at the hairpin and looked at it not as an ornament, but as a hinge on which the day had turned. He picked up the folded handkerchief and set it back down without taking the peineta with it. The little comb stayed on stone, pale as a tooth. He looked at the bishop. "You want the word at the altar?" "Yes." "Then the altar will have it." He looked around the circle and let every set of eyes see him choose. "We return to the cathedral," he he said. "The truth will be mine to speak." The courtyard exhaled as the decision took shape, and then feet began to move. Lanterns were lifted. Cloaks were brought. Men and women who had spent a lifetime arranging their faces arranged their steps instead, the palace emptying into streets that smelled of late summer and the ashes of the day. The hour before dawn had a private hush. Even the watchman spoke softly, out of respect for a city that needed its sleep. Rodrigo walked at the front because anything else would read as hesitation. He did not look back. He knew the sound of his household behind him the way a captain knows the creak of his ship. The captain of the guard fell in a pace to his right, ready to go faster if asked, ready to slow if the bishop's stride required it. The steward kept pace on the left, that slim notebook under his arm like a habit he could not break. The dowager's fan did not open. It ticked once against her wristband and was still. Cool air came off the cathedral stones as they approached. The great west doors loomed dark and barred. Rodrigo signalled, and a verger, summoned by the earlier messengers and wearing sleep like a shawl he had set aside for duty, shuffled keys with a competence that made a symphony of iron on iron. Metal turned. Wood groaned. The doors sighed inward. Rodrigo paused a fraction before crossing the threshold. He did not pray. He measured. He measured the faces waiting to judge him in the morning against the faces watching now. He measured the cost he had already accepted against the cost he would pay if he made a smaller man's choice. He stepped inside with his jaw set and his shoulders not bowed, no matter what the hour asked. The nave held the night like a breath. Candles lay unlit along the rail. Incense from noon had thinned to a thread. A sacristan moved fast with a taper, touching wick to wick until a line of small suns trembled and caught. Light ran along the altar like a released rumor. The bishop went to the choir with no ceremony and set his hands to vestments as if he would accept no help but speed. Canon Esteban followed, his book under his arm and his eyes ready to find the place as soon as it was time. Rodrigo took in the congregation that had gathered without summons. Soldiers at the edges, servants whose duties ended last, courtiers who could not sleep when there was a story to finish, a handful of parishioners who had come because the bells had stirred their thin dreams. He saw them all and saw beyond them, to the absent city that would wake to what he did in this hour. He found Isabelle with his eyes because he could not find her. She stood near the front rail, the white of her attire dimmed by the candlelight, her mantilla soft as breath against her hair. She looked toward the altar and then, quickly, toward where Sebastian waited in the same seat he had taken that noon. The gesture was small and human. Rodrigo let himself see it because it hurt in the right way. He took that hurt and made it into something he could carry to the rail. He stepped into the pool of light before the altar and bowed his head to the bishop, as one man bows to another when war and politics set rank aside for 5 minutes. "Excellency," he said, "we came to repair what we could not complete." "We will speak it," the bishop answered, "and then we will be quiet." Rodrigo nodded. It was a strange relief to be given such a simple command. He waited until the verger had placed 2 extra candles by the book, and until Canon Esteban had found the clean page. He let the silence deepen a notch, because words fall better when nothing else competes. He did not look at the dowager. He did not look at the steward. He only looked at the man who would write his sentence into the shape of his life. "The bride was not free," he said. The sound of it left his mouth and sat in the air without tremble. It hung there, not as confession or excuse, but as a fact that every other choice would now acknowledge or defy. The bishop listened the way an old tree listens to a small wind, with stillness and the recognition that not all motions are storms. Rodrigo went on. The will that would have been asked at the altar had been turned. It could not walk toward the sacrament on its own feet. We interrupted the rite by necessity, and we do not seek to rejoin it tonight or ever. I accept what follows. The bishop did not say good. He nodded once, a movement easy to miss if one were not watching his face. "The declaration is made," he said. He looked to Canon Esteban. "Record it." Esteban opened his book, and wrote with a care that made his pen move slower than thought. The scratch settled the silence further. He wrote names, and an hour and a sentence that would carry weight for years in a way none of its words could bear alone. He sprinkled sand. He blew gently. He waited until the ink did not smudge when his finger touched the margin. Behind and to the right, the dowager had turned her head slightly away. Not in shame, in control. She meant people to see her profile and remember how statuary handled grief. Doña Amalia stood just far enough to avoid notice and close enough to hear, her fan half open, covering her mouth as if she warmed herself at a fire. The steward's pencil ticked against his notebook and then stopped because some sums were not for ink. Rodrigo had not finished. He looked toward the dowager because hiding anything now would be a kind of lie, and he had just renounced lies. There was pressure, he said. There were hands that moved too many pieces at once. He did not say your hands. He did not need to. The bishop shifted his gaze. It went from Rodrigo to the dowager as naturally as water takes a clean path. Doña Elvira let the silence make her answer cost more. The match would have served us, she said at last, still, precise. I did nothing that houses do not do when they are not tired of their names. Canon Esteban's mouth thinned. And yet, he said, houses are to have souls. The paper was procured, the bishop said, not kindly, not cruelly. This is what I am to understand. The dowager's fan closed with a soft click. The steward used more zeal than wisdom, she said. He thought to unfurl an umbrella against rain and called it charity. The steward bowed. He knew how to take guilt without letting it land hard. I overstepped. Canon Esteban wrote that as well. He did not add adjectives. He did not need to. People would supply them. Rodrigo lifted his chin. We will not use the paper, he said. We will not allow it to be used. The dowager did not argue. She did not apologize. She placed her reticule on the rail with her slender fingers and opened it. The orange blossom hairpin lay on top of the folded linen. It looked very small and very loud. The house returns what it should not have kept, she said, and for once her tone was stripped of embroidery. Rodrigo did not take it. He looked toward the only person in the room who could set that object back in the world with clean hands. Bring it here, he said to the verger. The verger came as if he walked over a river he hoped was frozen. He took the hairpin on the linen and held it as one holds a fragile relic. He passed it very carefully to Rodrigo. For a beat, every eye in the nave watched the small movement. Rodrigo turned and looked at Isabelle. 100 people saw a duke bid a woman step to him. She did not move for a second. Fear is not the only thing that keeps the feet still. Joy does it too. When a thing one thought one had lost comes back, dressed in pain and in rightness. She stepped forward until the candles had her in their reach, and the scent of beeswax wrapped around the clean scent of orange leaf that seemed to cling to her dress. Rodrigo held the hairpin out with both hands, as if returning a seal. This belongs where you choose to place it, he said, not where someone else declares. Her fingers closed over the small weight. It was warm from the linen. It was warm from his hands. For a moment, that warmth was the only thing she could feel from wrists to elbows. She nodded. Her breath made a small sound, because breath cannot always be trained. The bishop's hand made a small motion that settled the moment. The church acknowledges what has been spoken, he said. The marriage did not pass into sacrament. No stain remains. He rolled the word stain in his mouth like a thing men had thrown at women from time immemorial and set it aside on the stone floor where it could die. Canon Esteban closed his book to mark the end of one kind of hour. The bride is free, he said, using the word with a simplicity that made it shine. There was a shiver, an audible lessening of something tight. Servants shifted and found they could stand without thinking about elbows. The soldiers took a half step back because the threat had left their work, and there was nothing left to guard except the dignity of people who had almost lost it. Sebastian stood up. He had not been among those with duties. He had made his own. He stepped into the cleared space with a gravity that gave his body weight. He did not look at the dowager. He did not look at Rodrigo. He looked at the bishop because what came next needed to be said into the listening of someone whose book bound the 30 minutes they were living. "You told us the word must be spoken where it counts," he said. "Then let me ask what must be asked here." The bishop's mouth moved like a man hiding humor that would be mistaken for levity. "Ask," he said, "but do not mistake this place for a stage." "I will not," Sebastian said. He turned toward Isabelle. He had been careful all night not to trap her with his eyes. Now he let himself see her. "You are free," he said simply. "Use it." It was not a question. It was permission from a man who could not grant it, and wanted to anyway. It was also a plea no one else would hear because only she knew how his voice sounded when he had been hurt in battle and asked for water rather than a doctor. She stood very still and felt how the world had shrunk to the space between the rail and the front pew. In that small place, a life fitted. She could see, with the odd clarity of people in shock and joy at once, the grain of the wood where Sebastian's hands had rested for an hour earlier, the place where the varnish had worn away and the oak shone honest. She could see the faint stain where a candle had been set too close to the linen in some other ceremony. She could see the curl of smoke around the bishop's left hand as a candle redrew the air between them. She heard her heart settle into a manageable rhythm. She held the hairpin close. She did not judge herself for wanting to put it back where it had been when she had felt her life change direction. "I choose," she said. The word moved like the soft strike of a bell and asked for no interpretation. It made the back of her throat ache with relief. She looked at Rodrigo for a heartbeat and found there not permission but acceptance, which is better because it asks nothing in exchange. She looked at the dowager and saw a woman who had survived too much to be broken by a single night. Then she looked at Sebastian and let him see the life he had not dared to hope could be offered to him in public. "I choose," she said again, because sometimes words do not fill the room the first time. "I choose you." Sebastian's shoulders went a degree out of line because he let relief deform a man trained to be straight. The line corrected itself at once. The correction was beautiful because it was not for appearances. It was for her. He did not go to her. He did not need to. The choice had been made where it needed to be made. Rodrigo inclined his head, and the motion traveled through the nave like the end of a storm. "So be it," he said. It was not his to grant. It was his to stand beside. The bishop lifted his hand, palm toward them both. He did not spread it like a showman. He set it as a quiet light. "The church has no quarrel," he said. "Go into the morning clean." He turned and left the rail. It was done. The book would say so when the wax dried. They did not leave at once. People had to learn how to move in a world that had changed while they watched. A maid crossed herself and did not know why she had waited to do it. The sacristan pinched a wick and blew it out, because too much light makes an empty church feel sad. Doña Amalia closed her fan very slowly, as if this were an end she could work with. The steward tucked his pencil away because sometimes it is better not to write. Isabelle looked at the hairpin in her hand and understood that it had been a test and a weapon and an anchor. She lifted it, not dramatically, and slid it back into her hair above the ear with a quick practiced movement. The little teeth found the knot by habit. It settled. She exhaled and let the breath go where it pleased. Rodrigo saw almost nothing and everything. He drew in a breath of cold incense and turned to the captain. "Open the side gate," he said. "Enough." They went into the cloister because none of them knew how to go into the world yet. The enclosed walk received them with its steady arches and old greenery. The dawn had made a thin line at the lip of the sky. Birds tested their first notes on the air and found them sufficient. The stone felt different underfoot, cooled by the night and tempered by 1,000 feet before. Isabelle stepped into the cloister and paused under the nearest arch. The orange trees in the courtyard were dark shapes holding lighter darkness. Small fruit hung like dull lanterns not yet lit. The fountain in the inner court sounded closer here, as if the water trusted the walls to carry it. Sebastian joined her beneath the arch. He held out his hand as a man holds out a cup when someone has been thirsty too long to drink without spilling. He did not take hers. He let her take his. She did. She fitted her fingers to his without rehearsal. The shape had been learned in a storm and kept in her since. It felt like waking. "You did not bow," she said. The words came out on a breath that almost laughed. "Not to anyone who would cost me." "I nearly forgot how," he answered. He lifted her hand an inch, not higher, because privacy requires smallness in public. "You said it twice. I will not spend those words foolishly." The light changed on the stone. The sky moved toward color. The bishop's footsteps faded behind them with Canon Esteban's. The verger pulled a small door closed and left them not alone but less witnessed. Rodrigo stopped at the entry to the cloister and did what he had done all night, measured and chose. He could have walked away. He could have stood like a shadow and let them feel chilled. He took 2 steps into the arch and looked directly at the 2 people who would complicate his life and lighten it in ways he had not expected. "Do not leave me a mess," he said. The words were dry. The tone carried the exhaustion of a man who had asked his soul to get him over a fence and found that it had. "If you make a vow, keep it." Sebastian inclined his head at last. It was not capitulation. It was recognition. "We will." Rodrigo looked at Isabelle. He had not smiled since noon. He did not now, but something eased around his mouth as if the muscles remembered what it felt like to do so. "You did not ask for this," he said. "No," she said, "but I asked for other things. I will not pretend I was unlucky." He nodded. He turned as if to go and caught sight of the hairpin's pale curve under the veil. His throat moved, and then he was gone, his boots soft on the stone, the captain falling behind like a tide going out from a shore. The cloister seemed to grow as the light entered it. The birds took heart from their own voices and grew louder. Swallows in the eaves woke in a body and went slicing into the new morning, each wingbeat drawing lines that only their small hearts could read. Isabelle lifted her free hand and touched the hairpin. She looked at Sebastian the way a person looks at a landscape they never thought they would see under daylight. "This is ours only, if we carry it," she said. "Do you understand?" "I have nothing else worth carrying," he said. "You know that." "Do I?" She let the question rest, but her eyes made the answer kinder than words would have managed. "Say it then, not in a way to bind, in a way to be sure." He swallowed, as men do when courage must pass through a small place. He held her hand, not tighter, not looser. "I will keep you," he said, straightforward as a soldier. "And I will not let honor be a word we throw at other people when we are tired. I will make room for your life beside mine. I will learn softness, even when the day asks for the other thing." She stood very still, listening like a woman at her door, hearing the voice she has wanted all night and deciding whether to open. She turned her head so the dawn slid over her cheek. "And I," she said, "will not be afraid of your sorrows. I will not be frightened by the parts of you other people have mistaken for stone. I will love you where people do not watch, and where they do." He exhaled as if he had been holding a breath for the length of the nave. He moved a fraction closer. He did not take her into his arms. He bent his head so that the space between them learned his breath. He left it at that. The swallows made a new pattern over the courtyard, stitching darkness and light with their small wings. The bells began, not the noon's heavy proclamation, but the delicate notes that told the city morning had come whether it wanted it or not. The sound fell through the arches and into their hands. Isabelle lifted their joined hands and set them against her heart for one long beat. When she released, the warmth remained. She turned and began to walk slowly along the cloister, and he matched her. Footsteps on stone, the air getting brighter. A world assembling itself around them in the order they had made by speaking when it mattered. The hairpin held. The veil did not tremble. The day opened. Thank you so much for listening to this story all the way to the end. We hope it moved you as much as it moved us while telling it. We'd love to hear your thoughts. Leave us a comment telling us where you're listening from and what you liked the most. Rate this story from 0 to 10. What score would you give it? If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and leave a like as a show of support. That really motivates us to keep creating and sharing more stories full of emotion and life lessons. And before we go, we want to remind you that an exciting and heartwarming story recommendation will appear on the final screen. If you'd like to enjoy it, just click on the video. Thank you once again for being here, and we'll see you in the next story.